Gupta, Professor, SMS Medical College, and in charge of Pediatric Gastro Division. I welcome you all, participants and esteemed faculty on behalf of Ped Gastro Rajasthan. Ped Gastro Rajasthan is a newly formed society with a vision to create awareness related to digestive disorders of children. Those who share our vision are kindly requested to join this society. So, how to join this society we'll discuss in the end of this meeting. One of our several activities in our mind was to conduct a monthly theme-based CME, theme-based meetings for pediatricians, and we are happy to have first one happening today, which is on the very common disease, celiac disease. The moderator for today's session is Dr. Jagdish Singh.
No audio.
ऑडियो प्रॉब्लम.
डॉक्टर आरके गुप्ता अनम्यूट करो, आपको अनम्यूट करो, आप म्यूट हो गए.
Should I repeat?
Yes, repeat please.
Good evening, everyone. Myself, Dr. R.K. Gupta Division, SMS Hospital. I like to extend a warm welcome to you all. To Ped Gastro Rajasthan is a newly formed society vision to create awareness related to digestive disorders of children. Those who share our vision are requested to join this society. And how to join this society? It will be told to you in the end of this session. One of the several activities in our mind was to conduct a monthly theme-based meeting, or you can say CME, for pediatricians. And we are happy to see the first one happening today, in the second Friday of this month, in this beginning of this year. The moderator for today's session is our senior Dr. Jagdish Singh sir, Professor and HOD Pediatrics, who has been my teacher, my guru, my mentor, and a very humble person, and always very helping, and is full of the knowledge and bubbling knowledge. He has got new ideas, new things, and we are lucky to have that he has consented to be a moderator, and his keen interest in the celiac disease. And Dr. Lalit Varadia, my dear friend, who is a pediatric gastroenterologist in the STMH hospital and has more than 15 years of experience in the pediatric gastroenterology. So we have two moderators. So I request moderators to start the meeting. Dr. Lalit and Dr. Jai Singh sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. R.K. Gupta. So it is my proud pleasure to introduce my teacher, Dr. Ujjal Podar. He is currently professor and head of Department of Pediatric Gastroenterology at Sanjay Gandhi Institute, Lucknow. This is the institute which started the first training program in pediatric gastroenterology in the country, and this is the first pediatric gastroenterology department to be started in the country. He has done MD in pediatrics from PGI Chandigarh, then DNB in pediatrics, and then DM in general gastroenterology at PGI Chandigarh. He is among the very few who have done DM in general gastroenterology and have restricted themselves to pediatric gastroenterology. That shows his passion towards this specialty. He has around 45 awards, which includes 14 international awards, 161 publications, which include 86 international publications. He is the author of 16 book chapters, and he has delivered 169 guest lectures. And if I have to just talk about his grip on this subject, celiac disease, I will narrate one small incident. During my training in Lucknow, when in the OPD we used to take history, I especially, I take a lot of time taking history, and he used to sit in the chamber next to me. And on several times, he used to tell, Lalit, don't waste your time. This is celiac. Call him for biopsy tomorrow. So I used to wonder, I am taking the history. He has not seen the child. He's just, listening to our conversation. He used to diagnose. So we used to think that, sir could smell celiac. So with this, I would like to ask sir to take over, and I would request sir to set the text before we start the uh, question answers. And I'll request all the audience to please put the questions in the space given to you, available to you. And we hope to have a lovely session for next a year, next 1 hour, and we hope to take all the questions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Lalit. Before starting my presentation, I will take a couple of minutes. At the onset, I must thank Dr. R.K. Gupta to take the initiative to start this pediatric gastro Rajasthan. I guess this will be the first uh, state branch of our pediatric gastro, and I'm sure it is going to be a great success with Dr. R.K. Gupta as the president, Lalit as chairperson, and our dynamic notable as the as the treasurer. Uh, Lalit said my dedication to pediatric gastro, but I said I will tell you the story. The Lalit's dedication to pediatric gastro is unmatched. Some of you have heard this story, but I guess it is almost more than 10 years. It is worth telling. Today's crowd probably don't know who is Lalit and who is Dr. Ujjwal Poddar. The incidents happened in 2002. I was invited as a to deliver lecture in KEM Mumbai, and Lalit was happened to be a MD pediatrics student over there. He just completed his MD pediatrics, and it was a pediatric gastro meeting organized by Indian Society of Gastroenterology. I delivered 2 talks. I participated in case discussion, and Lalit was there at the audience. And that day, Lalit decided that yes, I need to do pediatric gastro, and I need to get trained under this person. He decided that his training will be incomplete if he doesn't go with Dr. Poddar. That time I was in PGI Chandigarh. So Lalit chased me. He joined as a senior resident in PGI Chandigarh in pediatrics. And in a month or two, he came to know that Dr. Poddar is relocating himself. I was selected in SGPGI, and I decided to move from PGI Chandigarh to SGPGI. Ahead of me, Lalit joined SGPGI as a pediatric gastro resident, and it happened to be Lalit is my first pediatric gastro student in SGPGI. So far, we have produced 14 DM in pediatric gastro, 50 plus PGCC, and maybe another 10 or 20 hospital service senior residents. So altogether, it will be 70. And I can vouch Lalit's dedication is unmatched. You know what? When Lalit completed his PGCC, the then HOD of gastroenterology told him in clear terms, Lalit, why are you leaving? You stay back. You will definitely get a DM seat. Lalit said, sir, if I do DM gastroenterology, then I will lose my touch for pediatric gastro. I want to do pediatric gastro. You start pediatric gastro, I will come back. But that didn't happen in next 5-6 years. But Lalit has left that official means offer. He started pediatric gastro in Rajasthan, the first person to start. Subsequently, he got himself trained in New Zealand also, but he has not left. He is the person. From 2003 onwards, he is dedicated to pediatric gastro. Just after doing 1 year PDCC training, he started. He stick to pediatric gastro, and till today, he is doing pediatric gastro. So his dedication is unmatched. Lalit, thanks for inviting me. This is the first CME of your chapter, and you chosen me. So I'm privileged. Thank you. So let us start our session. Is the slide visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what I'll do will before going to the question answer, I guess many of the audience they need a little bit of background of celiac disease. I'll give a brief about the celiac disease, not going into the detail because most of the questions framed by Dr. Jagdish and Lalit are quite interesting, and we'll go in depth of it. So let's start the celiac. Before that, I want to show this disclaimer because see, I am a person who's never gone into any webinar organized by any company. So I want to declare I don't have any kind of relation with any pharmaceutical company for this webinar. I was invited solely by this organization, Pediatric Gastro Rajasthan, to deliver this talk, and that's why I agreed. And I was informed that this webinar is being conducted under the banner of Pediatric Gastro Rajasthan only. So, celiac disease. What is celiac disease? It is a disease of the proximal small intestine. Each and every word is important in this definition. Characterized by abnormal intestinal mucosa and associated with permanent intolerance to gluten. There are three phrases. Abnormal intestinal mucosa. If there is a disease, there has to be a intestinal mucosal abnormality. You cannot have a patient labeled as celiac disease whose intestinal mucosa is normal. Secondly, it is a permanent intolerance to gluten. It is not a transient. You cannot cure a patient of celiac disease just by giving 2 years, 3 years of medicine. So you have to remember. And as we know, the gluten is there in wheat, rye, barley, and there is a debate about oat. So, what is the pathogenesis of celiac disease? This is a story of a gene and grain. This results from an inappropriate immune response against the gluten in genetically predisposed people. This is very important. If you don't have gene, you are not going to develop the disease. However, it has been shown that concordance in monozygotic twins for celiac disease is 75%. What does it mean? The common sense says that it is not 100%, hence there is something else is playing a role in the pathogenesis of the disease. And what is it? Environmental factor we don't know. So in a genetically susceptible host, some kind of environmental factor makes the person hypersensitive to gluten. That immune mediated inflammation causes the intestinal mucosal injury and malabsorption. And what is the genetic factor? That HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8, which is seen almost 99% cases of celiac disease. However, the same DQ2-DQ8 pattern is seen almost 30% of general population. So I will elaborate further on this issue that it doesn't help to diagnose, but at least it helps to rule out celiac disease. So what is the historical aspect? Many of you may or may not be knowing. It is the Samuel Gee. This man in 1888, he is the first person who has given the clear-cut clinical description of celiac disease, of a malabsorption, wasting, stunting, but it took another 60 years to discover what is the culprit, which causes the celiac disease. This man is a very intelligent, observant Dickey from Netherlands. He discovered that wheat is responsible. How he discovered? This is at the end of World War II, when he saw all those kids who were suffering from that cachectic disease, they become better. Because during the war time, there was a scarcity of supply of food, wheat. So their celiac disease improved. Once the war was over, there is a restoration of the supply. They again started purging, they become wasted. So he discovered there is something wrong in the bread which they're eating, which is causing them sick. And subsequently, this Van de Kamer who discovered it's not the whole wheat, it is the gluten of the wheat which is causing the disease. Subsequently, the histology intestinal biopsy was discovered by the Pauling. And it is believed that time that the duties of the Europe. What about the India? See, the 1888, but it took almost 80 years to say the celiac disease also seen in India. And courtesy to my mentor, I have been trained by this man, Professor B.N.S. Walia in PGI Chandigarh. However, he described those 7 children of celiac disease from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, where he started his career. However, in subsequent 30 years, the scene of this malabsorption was totally overwhelmed by tropical screw. And in 1990s, there is resurrection of the celiac disease after increasing awareness and availability of celiac serology. But if you see in India, where do you see celiac most? Just Dr. Gupta was telling that Rajasthan is probably topping the list. It beats the Punjab. But whatever we have seen, it is mainly the northern part of the India, what we call the celiac belt. And we used to believe that this is both gene and grain problem. Means that gene is predominantly there in the northern India and they are eating wheat and that's why they are developing disease. But a recent study, multi-centric study conducted under the banner of Indian Society of Gastroenterology, Dr. Ramakrishna has published this paper in 2016. What they have, the huge number of people they have screened, adult people, and what they have shown in North India, celiac disease indeed is much more common, 10 times more than South India. But if you see the gene, HLA, DQ2, DQ8, it is seen equally in North and South India. So probably South Indian people, they are carrying the gene, but because they don't eat wheat much, that's why they are not having the disease so much. What is the clinical presentation? Celiac disease is classically a iceberg phenomenon, iceberg. What you see is the tip of the iceberg. Means what we see is a symptomatic celiac disease coming to us with diarrhea, with failure to thrive, with anemia. They are just in the top. But what is submerged portion? You get what Dr. Gupta was suggesting. We have a huge spectrum of non-classical. What we used to call is atypical. Now they say instead of atypical, we should say non-classical celiac disease who doesn't have malabsorption feature. There is a set of silent celiac disease and a proportion of potential celiac disease. So altogether, if you see, it has been shown in a study, community study in Italy, for one diagnosed celiac disease, there are 7 undiagnosed celiac disease. And how do they present? We used to believe the celiac disease is just diarrhea and malnutrition and short stature anemia. But now it has been shown that classical presentation of malabsorption is seen in only 50%. Over half of them, 50%, they present with atypical or non-classical symptoms, and celiac disease is now diagnosed more often by non-gastroenterologists than gastroenterologists. The patient goes to the endocrinologist with short stature, refractory anemia to hematologist, to the orthopedic with bone problem. They can have, I have seen a couple of patients who had a huge abdominal distension and constipation, and they have been operated with a suspicion of Hirschsprung disease, turn out to be celiac disease. They can go to a neurologist with ataxia, seizure, neuropathy. They can have the dermatitis, fortunately dermatitis, herpetiformis is extremely uncommon in children, but seen in adults. And as a adult, they can have infertility, amenorrhea, etc. They can go to the obstetrician. So increasing awareness among the other specialties has helped to increasing the number of cases diagnosed as atypical presentation of celiac disease. Now, these are some major studies from India I have compared with the Western studies. If you see the study from Chandigarh, study from Lucknow, study from Delhi, study from Punjab, all North Indian studies in children, celiac disease has shown it predominantly diarrhea, failure to thrive, anemia, short stature, almost universal. But to compare to the Western, and the age of diagnosis in India is later because we are delaying, but they diagnose early within 2 to 3 years. Initially, it used to be diarrhea, but later on, it is shown that their age of diagnosis has gone up to 8 years, and now diarrhea is less, but more often they are diagnosed as short stature anemia, like atypical or non-classical celiac disease. And this is that our standard diagnostic criteria used to be 1990. Demonstration of characteristic changes in intestinal mucosa and unequivocal response to gluten-free diet. We no longer discuss this kind of criteria. I will discuss in detail that what are the latest criteria. How do you treat? Obviously, if it is a gluten which is culprit, you have to remove it, but it is easier said than done because it is a lifetime commitment. What I said, it is not transient. It is a permanent intolerance to gluten. So whole life, once you put a label, the whole life patient has to be off gluten. It is a more expensive, limits the patient socially, and it is not recommended unless you establish the diagnosis definitely. The product containing wheat, rye, barley must be stopped. The oat, people say there is the risk of contamination during harvesting and subsequent preparation. So it is better to avoid in the first year, but later on they can take oat. Most of the cases who have diarrhea, they can have lactose intolerance. So the lactose may be restricted to start with, but it is not need not to be restricted lifelong, and they need the supplement of iron, folic acid, calcium, etc. Lalit.
So, Dr. Jagdish Singh, you would like to start? So, we would like to ask with the first question, sir, what are the various atypical manifestation of celiac disease which a pediatrician is likely to miss, sir?
Interesting question, Lalit, because what we are just talking about is half of the patient now they present with atypical, and since the pediatricians looks after all the specialties, be it endocrine, hematology, genetics, so we need to have the idea what are the unusual, atypical or non-classical. Classical, we always believe this is the diarrhea and malabsorption, but atypical is non-diarrheal manifestation. So before that, we need to clarify the concept. There are two sets of things can happen to celiac disease. One is extra-intestinal manifestation, means they are directly related to celiac disease, and they tend to improve with gluten-free diet. They are manifestation of celiac disease, but they are not manifesting as diarrhea, but they will improve to gluten-free diet. Another set of things can happen. This is called the co-occurrence. Celiac disease associated condition, many autoimmune diseases can happen. They are not associated with gluten ingestion, and they don't respond to gluten-free diet. Suppose a patient of celiac develop type 1 diabetes mellitus. Type 1 diabetes mellitus is not going to improve by giving gluten-free diet or thyroid dysfunction. So we need to segregate these two issues. One is disease-related extraintestinal manifestation, which we call is the atypical manifestation or extraintestinal, and other is the co-occurrence of the disease. This first thing, the host of condition can manifestation is there as a extraintestinal. Almost half of the children can have aphthous stomatitis, dental enamel hyperplasia. People say what Lalit was telling, I can smell celiac, but people say a dentist can diagnose by looking at the smile of the child, whether it is celiac or not, looking at their tooth. Similarly, short stature, almost 10% of all short stature can be because of celiac disease, delayed puberty, anemia, refractory anemia. One of the common manifestation in adult, even in children also, we do get anemia as a isolated manifestation of celiac disease. They can have only hypertransaminasemia, and now the liver societies have recommended that you need to investigate for celiac disease any patient coming with high transaminases without any other etiology. They can have arthralgia, non-erosive arthritis. Dermatitis herpetiformis is a entity which is less common in children, it seems in adults, and there's some headache, anxiety, depression can also happen in atypical manifestation. That we did this study. The Abhinav is from Rajasthan. He's one of our first few PDCC, ultimately he did DM. And in 2 years' time, we screened for celiac disease of 200 cases, half of them with diarrhea, that means classical, and half of them non-classical. And we managed to diagnose celiac disease equally in both the groups. So it is basically you need to look for it, you will get it. And our patients are coming from endocrinology, from genetics, from hematology, with short stature, anemia, rickets, etc. If you go into the detail, the commonest the set of patients where we got the celiac disease atypical presentation, anemia, short stature, abdominal distension, rickets, and type 1 diabetes mellitus. So it is there. We need to look for it. We need to get some hang on it that the patient with just abdominal distension, it's not always Hirschsprung. It can be because of celiac disease.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think even the seizures, I mean, our pediatric neurologist has, suspected, very well suspected celiac even in presentation where it was, especially the occipital seizures.
Yeah.
And so TTG turned out to be positive and the biopsy had proven that this was in fact celiac disease.
So actually what I'll want to point out actually to the audience especially, after stomatitis we get so many cases. We forget about evaluation regarding celiac disease. After stomatitis. So this is one of the carry home messages which Dr. Ujjwal has stressed as number one. It's almost sometimes up to the extent of 40%. Do we get the TTG done? No, I won't say that many pediatricians would do that. Second thing is the dental problem. Many people come to us, the dental enamel hypoplasia. They would go, we can also have a look at it, but we forget to get the TTG done. In rickets, we are now getting it done.
Yeah.
So what we are learning till present in the pediatricians, short stature, chronic diarrhea, failure to thrive, and these type of things, or what we have learned recently in the last 7 to 8 years, all cases of diabetes type 1, they should get a TTG done or a celiac screen done. And all cases of TTG positive or a celiac case should get a diabetes evaluation done. So this is already picked up. But what we have got to really add on actually in today's webinar, I feel cases in which enamel hypoplasia, dental problems are there. We must, after stomatitis, we must also pick up all these things. Thyroid, I have never seen, or I would rather correct my word, very few pediatricians getting a TTG done in a case of hyperthyroidism. When the patients are coming to us with hyperthyroidism, we would just get some other tests done, but we forget to screen for any celiac disease. So this is what actually has been highlighted very well. So this is what has got to be really picked up from the webinar.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Jagdish.
Yeah. So, sir, another question which comes is that celiac is known to be associated with several autoimmune disease, and when we discover the disease, we start on gluten-free diet. So we kind of tend to assure them that okay, once you are on gluten-free diet, he will not have any complication related to celiac disease. Is that true in?
Thank you, Lalit. Actually, I was hinting at to this point in this issue that we need to remember there are two conditions. One is associated, another is co-associated. Means associated with celiac disease, associated with the gluten, and those are the conditions will improve. Like the classical example is the dermatitis herpetiformis. Dermatitis herpetiformis, people say it is some kind of like autoimmune disease. It is not. It is clearly gluten related. You start gluten-free diet, they will improve. But that co-occurrence, the condition, they actually inherit a similar genetic makeup. That's why the multiple things can happen in the same patient. Like celiac with type 1 diabetes mellitus, celiac with autoimmune thyroiditis, these are co-occurrence. But what happens if you don't expose them to gluten? Can you prevent them from development? Or after you diagnosing, you stop gluten? Do they get out of this problem? That issue needs to be addressed. Let us see what is the literature. As I said, the type 1 diabetes, almost 5 to 10% of them, they develop celiac, and in thyroid, Dr. Jagdish was hinting at, it is 7 to 26%. Now, very interesting study. This is first of its kind. This is a multicentric study from Italy published in Gastroenterology 1999. But what they have done, they have retrieved the record of celiac disease of 909 cases, and their mean age was 16 years. Now, they have the three group of patients. One, the children less than 2 years, children 2 to 10 years, and children more than 10 years in celiac group. They compared them with the healthy control of 1,268 and Crohn's disease control 163. Now they look for autoimmune disease by questionnaire and reviewing their all hospital record. what they have discovered that autoimmune disorders is much more common in celiac and Crohn's than general population, 14% against 3%. And most of these cases, the celiac disease was diagnosed before autoimmune in just 20%, but autoimmune disease followed by celiac disease 80. That means they have autoimmune diseases and then you screen for celiac, you get celiac in 80% of the cases. But celiac disease, you keep on screening, you are diagnosing autoimmune, it is less common. Now, what is most interesting is that age group wise, in less than 2 years age group when diagnosed as celiac, autoimmune disease is just 5%, whereas it is 23.6%, it is more than 10 years. So what is the conclusion of this study is that age at diagnosis was only predicting factor for developing autoimmune diseases. Indirectly, they are hinting at age of diagnosis means what? A child is born with a genetic makeup of celiac and an exposure to gluten, he is going to develop celiac disease. So from the beginning, he is exposed to gluten. Now you are diagnosing celiac at the age of 15 years. So this child has exposed to 15 years of gluten. On the contrary, a child, you are diagnosing celiac at 2 years. So at the base, his exposure time will be 2 years. It will be less than that, maybe 1.5 years. So this indirectly they are telling the longer the exposure of gluten, more chance of developing autoimmune diseases. This is the first study. But is it true? Now, coming to the next study is from again Italy, questionnaire based. They have 422 celiac disease, but here age group is older. There it is predominantly the younger children. Here 16 to 84, mainly adult. They compare with healthy control of 605 or similar age group, and what they have shown autoimmune disorders is 30% in celiac disease group versus 11%, almost 3 times more than general population. However, the mean duration of gluten exposure to those celiac who had autoimmune diseases was 31 years versus 32 years who didn't. That means the duration or exposure time has not made one group is more susceptible to the other. Now, logistic regression analysis, what they have shown that increased age at diagnosis of celiac disease is a risk factor, but what they have calculated actual gluten exposure, taking in account their compliance, their follow-up duration, their age of diagnosis of autoimmune diseases, everything together, they have calculated actual gluten exposure is not predictive risk factor for developing autoimmune diseases. Now, this is diagonally opposite version of the first study. Next, come to the third study. Celiac disease, is it protective gluten-free diet to prevent the autoimmune diseases? In this study, this is both adult and children, 27 centers from France. This study was published 2008. And again, the celiac disease was diagnosed before autoimmune disease around 30%, but 70% is basically celiac disease diagnosed later on. Now, in this study, out of 924 celiac disease cases, almost 378 are children. And what they have shown, the cumulative risk of autoimmune diseases at 15 years was 8%, and at 30 years, this risk increased to 15%. 15% of celiac children, they are having autoimmune diseases at 30 years of age. And the increased risk factor are family history of autoimmune disease is almost 2.5 times more chance of developing autoimmune disease, and age of diagnosis of celiac disease means older the age, more chance. What they said that before 36 years, the risk is 2.5 times. Now, what is interesting here is that cumulative risk of developing autoimmune disease, they have calculated those who are at 10 years compliant versus non-compliant. Means again, question of does gluten exposure increases the risk? They have shown those who are compliant, their risk at 10 years is 6% versus those non-compliant, it is more than double, and it is statistically significant. So they are telling that gluten-free diet has probably protected you. Those who are compliant, probably they are less chance of developing autoimmune diseases. But there is a caveat in it. This result is not seen in children. When they analyze the pediatric age group, those compliant versus non-compliant, there is no difference. Those who are strictly compliant, their incidence of autoimmune diseases are similar to non-compliant, and this result which they have shown is significant univariate. You know, in the statistics, multivariate analysis carries more weightage than univariate. On multivariate analysis, this risk of non-compliant having more autoimmune disease is not seen. So where we are? So that this review of all literature in 2016, what they have found out by analyzing the whole whatever existing data, we don't have any definite proof to say autoimmunity in celiac disease is gluten dependent, and gluten could be the triggering factor. Gluten exposure length before diagnosing celiac disease, that means when you are diagnosing the younger child or older child, has no impact on subsequent development of autoimmune diseases. Gluten-free diet failed to prevent the development of autoimmune disease. We have multiple studies to say that. Co-occurrence of autoimmune diseases and celiac disease is related to shared genetic predisposition. They share this HLA-DR3 and HLA-DR4, and that's why they have celiac and multiple autoimmune diseases. Now, clinical relevance and cost effectiveness of screening celiac disease for autoimmune diseases is doubtful. Now, if you start screening all celiac children for autoimmune diseases, firstly, the number of autoimmune diseases is enormous. You can look for just diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and thyroiditis. But what people have shown, what is this study is showing this autoimmunity. You found some antithyroid antibody, but it doesn't mean this patient needs treatment or patient has developed thyroid dysfunction. And this lag time from detecting this autoantibody to the clinical disease is several years. So what will you do by doing this screening? So unless and until they develop symptoms. So there is the doubt. Do we need to screen all celiac for all sorts of autoimmune diseases? Other way around is not correct. If there is a patient who is type 1 diabetes mellitus, patient what Dr. Jagdish Singh was telling, patient of autoimmune thyroiditis, you need to screen for celiac, because once you diagnose celiac, you can treat, right? And the risk is higher. But other way around is not true. So there is doubtful you need to screen or not.
Yeah, so I think if I have to just summarize this, so maybe earlier the diagnosis, less is perhaps the chances of development of autoimmune disease. Better is the compliance, less is the chances of autoimmune disease.
No, this used to be the perception. Now the subsequent, the first study, 99, they showed that if you diagnose celiac early, then probably you will prevent the subsequent development. But later on, people have shown no, that is not true. Actually, no, this is not a gluten-related disease. Exposure to gluten is not predisposing this patient to develop autoimmunity. It is a genetic predisposition.
Yes, so sir, when we counsel that to ensure compliance, we tell them that unless you are compliant, you are likely to have more autoimmune disease.
No, that
are
is
we
not
right in saying that?
No, this is not right. This is scientifically incorrect. We should give correct information and counsel. To have a better compliance to gluten, we cannot bring some abstract thing. This is not correct. We should not do it. This used to be the perception, but I am giving you the whole literature, what people have started showing, and what is the latest information. Latest information says there is a no link to the duration of gluten exposure.
So sir, how would you counsel a newly diagnosed patient to ensure compliance in relation to the subsequent risk of development of?
That I will say, see, there are increased risks, but probably will not be able to modify by giving gluten-free diet. Whether you take gluten-free diet or not, you are going to have the disease.
Wouldn't that affect compliance?
Yes, this will. So we have to take other way to counsel them. But see, in India, we play many tricks to counsel the patient. For endoscopy, how many times we say that I am doing polypectomy, and I might produce a perforation in 1 out of 20 patients. We never say that. Then no one is going to get a polypectomy done from Dr. Poddar. They will go to Lalit or somebody else.
So Dr. Jagdish Singh, how do you counsel? I think he has, great experience with this.
No, actually, I missed out. I was just speaking to somebody. What is your specific query, Dr. Lalit, actually?
Yeah, so my query to Dr. Poddar was that when you diagnose a case of celiac disease, we generally tend to tell them that the compliance is very important and it is going to help you to prevent subsequent development of other disease, which is scientifically not correct. But if we tell them that whether you are compliant or not, you are at a risk of subsequent autoimmune disease, the compliance is going to be poor. So, sir has suggested if there would be some indigenous way, so the audience would want to know how do you counsel?
Actually, the counseling method is literally based on actually my concept of creating a little bit of fear. It may be overdoing that because it may not be really true actually creating or generating that sort of fear, but I feel phobia works when we are counseling, and especially telling them that the child will be affected in more than one ways. It's not only the problem for which you were diagnosed, it's also many other problems relating to this disease, or what actually is known as concurrent or co-occurrence diseases.
Yes.
Basically, they are co-occurrence. The exact
Yes.
word is co-occurrence. They happen to be more frequent in such people. So what I tell them, that the word which I even tell them, that yes, there is a small possibility that he might go on to develop more problems, and that could ultimately affect very badly his mental ability, his physical ability, his height ability, and all other things, and it will also affect him mentally also. So all points of view, you have got to remain gluten free by all means. So if you want your child to develop into in a nice way, so by creating that phobia actually, because I remember actually what Dr. RK and we, myself and Dr. Kapil Garg used to said कि आप अपने बच्चे की जान जोखिम में डाल रहे हैं, है ना? And sometimes we tell that you will make him a lesser human being if you do not comply with a gluten free diet. So that is something we used to stress actually, कि this is always a big risk for you. So that I find it works in majority of the cases, but not all. It does not work in all, because that will be one of the points which coming into me, they would say, no, there is a child I know of, he has taken some very good treatment from Ayurveda or
Yeah.
from Patanjali and from homeopathy, and now he's perfectly all right.
Yeah.
And they would even threaten to leave us कि हम लोगों को लगता है यार हमारा पेशेंट हमारे हाथ से निकल रहा है, and they say that no, this is not possible. So it requires a lot of time, which we have a lot of time during the lockdown period and the corona period. But maybe, when we are doing our regular practice, sometimes we run short of time. So we call them for a separate session. We call them and I find actually the diet counselors, they don't really do a good work. Now it's okay telling them that no, I am the person who's concerned, and then giving them a personal example. Look, this is what has happened in a person known to me or a family known to me. They take it more seriously. That is where actually I feel it is working actually at times. And yes, some amount of a small degree of phobia is required, creating that sense, that it is a serious matter and you must be gluten free. Your child must be gluten free now.
Okay, thank you, Jagdish Singh ji, sir. So we go to the next, sir. I think Dr. Poddar, sir, this is another which is very common dilemma for us, as for the next child. Let's say this next child is 3-year old, and there may be another situation where the next child is not born yet, and the what is our advice to the family as to what is the right age that the next child should be screened, and what is the method?
This part is more or less settled. There is no debate that we need to screen first degree relative. That includes the siblings, that is even in the young parents, because now celiac disease is diagnosed. Many times we diagnose celiac disease in parents because they are not aware of their condition and they came with the child. So they need to be screened. What was said that high risk population screening, there is some debate that identifying and treating all celiac disease will don't diagnose all celiac. I said that it's 1 in 7. 7 are subclinical or they are having some mild symptom. We are not diagnosing, we are not treating them. What is the ultimate outcome? Do they have the shorter life expectancy? Do they have more malignancy? In the long-term progression of undiagnosed cases, it is not clear. The data is on both sides. Some people say there is increasing risk of malignancy and the life expectancy is shorter if you don't treat. And some other studies say that no, there is not much of difference. It's like a general population you can live with a celiac without symptoms. Recently, the United States Preventive Services Task Force, they reviewed the whole literature and they came out with this the statement that there is a insufficient evidence to assess the benefit and harms of screening, asymptomatic or even high risk for celiac disease. What they are worried about that the method we use for screening is not perfect. There is a false positivity that will bring more tests, and if you diagnose this patient, we don't know the long-term outcome, whether if you treat a asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic patient versus no symptoms. However, the North American Society of Pediatric Gastroenterology clearly recommended that children in high-risk group be screened, even if they don't have symptoms. First-degree relative, type 1 diabetes, autoimmune thyroiditis, what we are talking about, they need to be screened. Now, Lalit has put that another question. If the child is born in a family who has multiple members having celiac disease, that means there is a first-degree relative having celiac disease means his chance of having celiac disease will go up. When will you start the screening? You don't screen at birth. There are two ways to screen. One is you can do HLA screening at birth. That means you decide if this child is having HLA to have disease or not. If he doesn't have
associated condition, we are here now, first degree relative. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay. Okay, next slide. We already spoke about it. So the NASPGHAN has given recommendation we need to screen those high risk and the first degree relative. Okay, next. So actually we are here, the question.
Yeah, so I think this is, can the development of celiac disease in high-risk group be prevented by delaying introduction of gluten or prolonging breastfeeding? So this was one of the topic which came into our mind. And what is the right age of introduction of gluten?
Thank you, Lalit. This is on the basis of the observational studies, the perception was too early, means before 4 months of age, and too late, after 7 months, increase the risk of developing celiac disease in high-risk babies. High-risk babies means those babies who has a first-degree relative or, go back, or they are HLA positive. And there is a very interesting hypothesis in allergy and immunology that there is a window of opportunity of developing tolerance, especially for the oral tolerance. That period is 4 to 6 months. So if you can continue breastfeeding between 4 to 6 months, if we introduce those such a foreign protein, then probably the chances of tolerance is high. Go next. So next, Lalit.
Yeah.
Next slide. Yeah. So this is a study from Italy. They have checked whether the introduction at 6 months, at 12 months changes the risk of development of celiac disease in high-risk babies who are born in the first-degree relative or with a HLA DQ2, DQ8, and they did the serial serology, and whoever positive did the biopsy. So what they have shown at 2 years of age, the celiac autoimmunity means antibody positivity and disease, biopsy positive, both are higher, those who are introduced gluten at 6 months compared to those who introduced at 12 months. However, when they check the same set of babies at 5 years of age, then there is no difference in development of autoimmunity or development of the celiac disease. Breastfeeding, whether exclusively breastfed, no breastfeeding, or duration of breastfeeding, there is no effect on development of celiac disease. Next. So the conclusion is that neither delayed introduction of gluten nor breastfeeding modifies the risk of celiac disease among at-risk infants. Late introduction, what it does of gluten associated with delayed onset. It didn't change the frequency, but the onset was delayed when the gluten was introduced late. Next. So another study is basically from the 8 European countries. And again, this is a multicentric double-blind placebo-controlled trial of 944 infants who were divided into 2 groups who are HLA DQ to DQ positive. They wanted to see if you introduce gluten, low-dose gluten between 4 to 6 months along with breastfeeding versus no gluten window period, does it make any change? So what they have shown that the incidence of celiac disease at 5 years, there is no difference. And again, breastfeeding didn't make any difference. Next. So there is no window of opportunity, at least for development of tolerance in celiac disease. And our European Society has recommended that as far as the introduction gluten to a baby is concerned, anything between 4 months to 12 months is okay. Nothing is early, nothing is late in development of celiac disease. Next.
Yeah, so the next question is, very often a child comes to us on gluten-free diet based on some symptoms and positive TTG. So in this situation, we are, perplexed as to, whether we should continue the same, or which are the children where you would plan a gluten challenge?
This is a very interesting question and very common problem, at least as a pediatric gastroenterologist we encounter. Many times the babies are sent to us on gluten-free diet without any investigation, or just TTG was done positive, started on gluten-free diet. After 6 months, the baby is sent to you. So how do you confirm the diagnosis of celiac disease? Is he having celiac disease or not? So because parent will come and ask you that how long I have to continue gluten-free diet. So you need to have some information. That clinical performance of serological test depends on the ingestion of the gluten. Those babies who are taking the small amount of gluten or shorter duration, their chance of having very strong positivity goes down. And serology become negative in 80% of children on gluten-free diet in next 6 to 12 months. So if you get a baby who has come after 6 months of gluten-free diet, now repeating the same serology and showing negativity is not going to help you. Now, HLA-DQ gluten tetramers, this is actually new test. Actually, once it is available, and that will probably revolutionize our the approach to a child to diagnose on gluten. So, what they have developed is they have developed this tetramer in the or gluten specific T cell on gluten-free, very high sensitivity specificity. They have done basically tetramer, which basically like an antibody which bind to, we apply to peripheral blood mononuclear cell, and T cell specific to this such a gluten specific T cell bound to this tetramer, and they are seen as flow cytometry. So what they are doing, basically you are identifying a subset of patients who are having this gluten specific T cell by this test, and you can diagnose without waiting any further to do any challenge or anything. Next. But it is not yet available. Lalit, next slide. Next slide. Lalit, next slide. Next. Lalit.
Yeah.
Next slide. No? Slide is not moving. Lalit. Lalit. Lalit.
Also, yeah, I'll share the screen again. Sorry.
Okay. Next slide, Lalit. Next. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Go on. Next.
Okay, so the next question is, when do you do gene test? When a pediatrician should do gene test?
Okay. Go next. Next. Show me the slide. Okay. So basically, gene test means HLA testing in celiac disease. As we are telling that HLA DQ2 DQ8 prevalence is almost universal in celiac disease, but it's equally common in general population. 20 to 30% general population also have this HLA. So it has got very 99%. What does a child suspected celiac does not have HLA? That means he's not celiac. But if he has HLA, it doesn't prove that this is a celiac disease. Next. So it helps to rule out celiac disease. When you have a biopsy which is equivocal, it is not showing your villus atrophy, patient who is already discussing on gluten-free diet and was never tested for celiac disease for serology or biopsy, you want to rule it out. And when there is a discrepancy between serology and histology, you got a child who is having the serology positive, histology normal, or vice versa, their HLA will help. And suspected refractory celiac disease, when you want to confirm the diagnosis before going ahead for chemotherapy. Next.
So in short, sir, I think we are running late. So I would like to just ask, when you decide to do a gluten challenge, when do you do and how do you do?
Yes. Next. These are the indication of gluten challenge. When gluten-free diet was started without proper investigation, like biopsy was not done or serology not done, biopsy done, character initial serology was in a IgA sufficient patient, and celiac disease diagnosed in asymptomatic where you want to document mucosal healing, and diagnosed in first 2 years of life when the many other conditions can give rise to villus atrophy and you may not get a serology positivity. And the most importantly, what we encounter is the adolescent who wants to give up gluten-free diet. They have forgotten their disease part because they are very young child, and now they become adolescent. They want to say, I am not suffering from anything. Why should I continue gluten-free diet with so much of restriction? Next. So how do you do? There is some criteria to be fulfilled. You cannot do it any patient walking in for gluten challenge. You cannot do it before 7 years. It will affect the dentition. You cannot do it during the adolescent growth part between the 12 to 18 years. So on baseline, you should have a negative serology, negative, and biopsy is normal. And then you give gluten. How much? It is around 3 to 5 grams per day. And simple calculation, one slice of bread has 1.5 grams. So you can give around 2 to 3 slices per day, and it is to be given for 12 weeks. Repeat serology biopsy at the end of 12 weeks. You need to document histological deterioration because patient may or may not develop symptom. Patient may or may not seroconvert, means negative serology to positive serology. So the positive challenge means you need to have a histological deterioration in architecture. Next.
So I think the message is that for someone, when we avoid the biopsy, one biopsy at the beginning, end up having two biopsies.
Yep. Yep.
So, okay, so how do you assess compliance? So in your experience on follow-up?
Yeah, this is very important. The complaint issue, almost 1/3 of the children on long-term gluten-free diet, they have a compliance issue. And this is the recent meta-analysis of 49 studies comprising of 7,800 children. Last year, it has been shown that median poor compliance is 22% in pediatric age group. So what we do in day-to-day practice to check compliance, we simply ask question. This is self-reporting. Are you compliant? We ask parent, is your children sticking to gluten-free diet? This is called self-reporting. But we hardly rely on structural dietary questionnaire, which is supposed to be gold standard. And that was instituted by a trained dietitian, not the ordinary dietitian. And often we rely on serology, and we rarely go for histology, but there is a new test called the gluten immunogenic peptide, GIP, which can be measured in the urine, and that will tell you whether this patient is compliant or non-compliant. Now, if you have a situation where there is a lack of decline or persistent positivity of serology after 1 year, what we said that 80% cases serology become negative by 6 months to 1 year. It is persisting, means patient is non-compliant. And if the non-adherence is suspected, so you need to involve the trained dietitian. The factors which predispose the poor compliance are the lack of availability of gluten-free diet, poor palatability, cost, parents' knowledge about the celiac disease and its treatment, and especially adolescent age group. Next. Lalit, next.
Yeah, I think it is our time. Yeah.
So this is the new biomarker called the GIP, gluten immunogenic peptide, and it is measured in unit. This is nothing but the strip. It is a cartridge-based test, monoclonal antibody. It gives the result that within 4 to 6 hours of taking gluten, and it lasts for 1 to 2 days. And the most patients with celiac disease and no villus atrophy, they have negative GIP, and most patients who had that villus atrophy, despite being saying that they are gluten-free, they are having GIP. Next. And this is the study shown that if you have the histology is Mars 0, Mars 1, the most of them are negative in the urine GIP. That means they are not taking gluten, and most of them are positive when they have the Mars 2 or Mars 3. So more objective way to this biomarker.
So the next question is gluten-free diets. Where are the common, food items which there is an inadvertent consumption of gluten?
This is the very important issue, Lalit, that we heavily rely on this the medical interview, that self-reporting and serology, and to check whether the patient is compliant or not. But our ultimate goal should be the mucosal healing, which we never venture to do because we don't repeat the biopsy. Now, clinical response and negative serology does not correlate with mucosal healing. It has been shown the patient who are asymptomatic and intermittently taking gluten, they don't develop symptom, but they have a villus atrophy. Similarly, even the serology is negative, they can have villus atrophy. So we hardly explore the role of trained dietitian. We need to do it. And commercial gluten-free product in India, there is a big query because we don't have any legislative mandate to check for gluten content, and we don't have agency to put a label that these are gluten-free, these are not.
Dr. Jagdish Singh ji?
Yes, sir. Actually, this is another question. Actually, I'll just want to add one. Adult gastroenterologists, when they are performing these tests for various other reasons, that is, I would say young adults or past 18 years of age, they say that no, you just take the gluten diet for 2 to 4 weeks only. and we can repeat the biopsy. That is universally I found in the adult gastroenterologist. Like what we say is 6 to 12 weeks. There they always say, oh no, 2 to 3 weeks, and then you can go for the biopsy. You can go for that. So I was quite surprised. I thought I'll probably ask Dr. Ujjwal that why
Yes.
the adult gastroenterologist actually, are they correct when they say that only 2 to 3
Yes, they are. There is a recent study which has shown in the adult gluten challenge, you give just 3 grams of gluten for 2 weeks and do biopsy, you can get the changes. But for that, you need to have a trained pathologist. Our pathologists cannot diagnose partial villus atrophy. How do you expect a pathologist to do the morphometry and exactly tell you how much is the change of the villus architecture, how much is the increase in intraepithelial lymphocytes? These are subtle changes. The study in the study setting, it is possible, but in day-to-day practice, it is impossible to detect changes after 2 weeks of gluten. But yes, there is a study to say 3 grams of gluten for 2 weeks enough to detect the changes on histopathology.
So actually, what actually another question was that we always in a habit of seeking guidelines from our spouses, which keep on changing day to day,
Yeah.
and the same thing is happening also with the celiac disease guidelines.
Yes.
And it's always I remember there used to be a guideline long back. They used to say that if it is more than 10 times TTG, it is more than sufficient. No need to go for a biopsy. I was just talking of an old theory,
Yeah.
which of course has now been given up, and like this we keep on finding new guidelines keeping on coming, like just like the COVID-19 guidelines. So the most important practical guideline actually, and what actually in India, and especially in the northern India actually, will be a most practical guideline, and of course the 220 guidelines, uh, which will be the most appropriate one, huh?
I will give you 221 guideline.
Oh yes, great. 8 days into 221.
I have 221 guideline also. Let's start with our 2012 guideline. What was there? Lalit, keep on clicking because there is a lot of animation. So what this 2012 ESPGHAN guideline, which is actually landmark guideline. Stop, Lalit. Basically, what we used to say that we need to do biopsy to document that villus atrophy and show the clinical response to make a diagnosis of celiac disease. So this is first time they came with the idea we can avoid biopsy, provided you need to have 3 tests in different sample. First, you do the TTG. What Dr. Jagdish was telling, it has to be more than 10 times upper limit of normal in a symptomatic patient. Then second test in another blood sample of endomysial antibody and HLA. Now all 3 positive, then you are diagnosed with celiac disease. No need to do biopsy. But any other permutation or combination, you have to do biopsy. Next set, Lalit. But when it is a no signs and symptom, then what they said, you do the HLA first. HLA is negative, no celiac, no need to do anything. Positive, again you do the TTG. With IgA, TTG is more than 3 times, do biopsy less than 3 times. Next slide. You do endomysial antibody and then go for biopsy. So in the nutshell, that you can avoid biopsy, but you need to do whole lot of investigation which are not available. Not EMA, practically not available in India, and it is expensive. Getting HLA is probably will add more money than doing a biopsy. That was the 2012. Now, what is 2020 guideline? They say they realize that HLA is bullshit. Actually, it is a bullshit. When you are screening a patient with celiac disease, obviously patient is going to have HLA. So how it is going to help you? So their new guideline says whether it is a clinically suspected or as asymptomatic patient you are screening, guideline is uniform. You do the TTG is more than 10 times, but here they have added a star. They said you explain or discuss with the parent what do they want. You have a 2 arm. One is biopsy arm, another is non-biopsy arm. Non-biopsy arm means you have to do endomysial antibody on a separate blood sample. If both TTG positive, EMA positive, celiac disease confirmed. Next. Keep on clicking. But if your IgA TTG is less than 10 times but positive, you do biopsy. If positive but EMA negative, do biopsy. TTG negative, but you are suspecting strongly the celiac disease, and there may be reason for negative TTG, like patient is immunodeficient, so here his antibody is not going to go up. Extraintestinal manifest gluten intake. There you can do HLA to see what is the risk. Next. Next, Lalit. Next. So this is actually 2021 guideline. This is published January issue of Gastroenterology. And I found it most useful than our SPGAN 220 guideline. Now, what they say, clinical suspicion of celiac disease. They didn't say it is a symptomatic, asymptomatic. Now, what you face day-to-day practice, Dr. Jagdish, patient is coming to you with gluten-free diet. Already on gluten-free diet, started by somebody. So what will you do? There you do the HLA. If HLA is negative, you straight away say this patient does not have celiac disease, while patient is on gluten-free diet. But if HLA is suggest positive, then you need to go for gluten challenge, and when and how I already explained. So that simply give you the answer. A child already on gluten-free diet, not investigated properly, is coming to you. They want to know, is my child having celiac or not? You can answer that by this algorithm. Next is patient is not on gluten-free diet, on normal diet. You do TTG, and TTG positive. In a child, they said you can skip biopsy, do EMA, and make a diagnosis. In older children, adult, they said, no, we'll go for biopsy. And if the biopsy showed villus atrophy, it is celiac. But if a patient who is TTG positive, biopsy is normal, it is potential celiac. But if TTG is negative, clinically celiac disease unlikely. If the patient is IgA deficient, you go for IgG DGP test. Next. So coming back to this is my perception to the pediatrician. Who detects celiac disease? You, the pediatrician, by doing serology. But you don't diagnose. Who diagnose it? I diagnose, Lalit diagnose by doing biopsy. And who confirm the diagnosis? Again, you, the pediatrician, child will go back to you. If they show response to gluten-free diet, then diagnosis confirmed. This is our conventional diagnostic approach. You can take the new guideline 2020 or 2021, provided you have this EMA or as and when required HLA. Next.
So this is like, Dr. Jaya also pointed out in the chat box that, there is a fad of going on gluten-free diet in the West and now also in the our part. So what is the burden of non-celiac gluten sensitivity and wheat allergy in India, and how do we differentiate them from celiac disease?
Very good question, Lalit. Unfortunately, we don't have much data from India, but I will give you the global perspective. Almost 5% of global population, they take gluten-free diet. Just what is the prevalence of celiac disease globally? It is 1.4%. But what about this rest 4%? They are scared, or they feel that they are having gluten sensitivity, they avoid gluten, or there is some wrong perception that gluten-free diet, like vegetarian diet, is cardiac, decreases the risk of cardiovascular or neurological event. So as an adult, you grow older, now you start taking this preventive care, and there is some wrong perception in Google and somewhere. They said you start gluten-free diet, your risk of heart attack will decrease, your stroke risk will decrease. It is not substantiated. And these are the facts which propagating this concept of gluten-free diet without confirming any diagnosis. Now, if you see the gluten-related disorders, there may be autoimmunity like celiac disease, diabetes herpetiformis, or gluten ataxia. Second could be the allergic, which is extremely uncommon. Wheat allergy is IgE mediated. You can detect it by doing the IgE anti-gluten test. And what is the most important is non-autoimmune, non-allergic condition and the bulk majority of the world population, they declare themselves, I am NCGS, means non-celiac gluten sensitivity. What is this entity? This is basically when you develop symptom on ingestion of gluten, provided you are negative for celiac disease and wheat allergy. So once you ruled out celiac and wheat allergy, and you have a symptom correlation, whenever you take wheat, you develop symptom, you stop wheat, you become all right. So that is called NCGS or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Next. Now, this is the diagnostic criteria given by the Salerno expert group. What they said, you need to have a proper assessment of clinical response to gluten-free diet. Anybody walking into a chamber saying, I am gluten sensitive, it is not. You have to give a proper trial of 6 weeks trial of gluten-free diet and objectively assess their symptom, what is happening. So what is the, go back. Clinical objective assessment should be, you should use some kind of scale, visual analog scale 1 to 10, semi-objective way 1 to 3 symptom to find out how much is the change. And all this patient has to go for double-blind placebo-controlled trial, placebo-controlled gluten challenge to establish, is he really having non-celiac gluten sensitivity or not. Positive test, when you have any change of symptom of at least 30% of 1 or 2, then only you tell them you are positive by challenge, so you are NCGS, don't take gluten. Next. This is the only study of double-blind placebo-controlled trial in children. This is published recently in American Journal of Gastroenterology. Very interesting observation. This is from the 5 center in Italy, and they have evaluated all these chronic GI symptoms. Mainly these are functional gastrointestinal disorder. They have ruled out celiac, they have ruled out wheat allergy by doing the serological test. Out of 1,114 children, they could find symptom correlation. Means when they have taken gluten, they are having symptom is just 36, 3%. So there is total hype. People start thinking that most of our functional gastrointestinal disorder are nothing but NCGS is not correct, just 3% of them. Now what they have done, they have run in period of 2 weeks to look for what exactly patient is having while on gluten. Then they have given 2 weeks of gluten-free diet and recorded their symptom. Then double-blind placebo-controlled trial of gluten and placebo. And what they have found, out of these 36 patients, ultimately 39% are found to be positive by gluten challenge. Less 61% negative. So what does it mean? Even if the patient is coming with clear-cut history to suggest that they develop symptom while taking wheat, almost 60% of them, they are actually not having anything with the wheat. So the NCGS is extremely uncommon, at least in children. It's just 1% of all functional gastrointestinal disorder in children. Next. And these are the symptoms you can get. They can have GI, non-GI. These are all vague symptoms. Most of them can fit with functional gastrointestinal disorder like pain, bloating, diarrhea, dyspepsia, and extraintestinal like fatigue, headache, muscle pain, etc., etc. Next. Okay, we finish.
So I think for diagnosis of NCGS, you need to have a normal serology and a histology before you...
Yes, 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 that is a must. You rule out celiac disease, not only that, Lalit, you need to do specific IgE test to rule out wheat allergy.
Okay. So Dr. Jagdish Singh ji, can we take some questions from the chat?
No, I'll just actually want to just...
Yeah, please.
Actually, what I'm finding, actually, I don't know, there are always plus and minus regarding this concept, autistic disorders in children. We find many pediatricians and even the neurologists and so-called children developmental neurologists recommending gluten-free diet. And some of them say that, yes, the response may be there, but we do give a trial when we put them on a gluten-free diet. That is a concept which is there actually, when I'm looking at all these intestinal symptoms, that is the autistic children. I have one or two points, yes or no, from Dr. Ujjwal. Should all Down syndrome babies get a gluten sensitivity test done?
Yes. Answer is yes. They are high risk. Their chance of having celiac disease is high. So screening should be done.
Thyroid disease in children, a hypo or hyper. We get a very few hyperthyroidism cases. Hyperthyroidism is something. Should we get a TTG done or not?
Here, I cannot give you a straight away yes or no. Autoimmune thyroid diseases.
Yes.
Only the congenital hypothyroidism, because of thyroid dysgenesis or agenesis, they do not need celiac screening.
Agreed. Huh. Achha. Then another question which was coming up actually was, there have been a lot of talk regarding corona and this problem of celiac disease. And there used to be, that they are at an increased risk, no risk. And so what is your take on this?
Dr. Jagdish Singh, in relation to this, I don't think there is enough evidence to say that celiac disease prevent or increases the severity of corona. But there is a very interesting observation. There are some studies to say about the vaccine.
Yes.
Do they need special care, the celiac disease patient? You know what? There is a concept that almost 50% of the adult, they have hyposplenism. Their spleen shrinks, becomes smaller. So it is like a autosplenectomy in sickle cell. So what will you do? You need to protect them for pneumococcus. So people recommend that celiac disease patients should be protected. And there are evidence to say they are prone to pneumococcal pneumonia. So you should give elective pneumococcal vaccine to them. There another subset is said that rotavirus vaccine might prevent. This is one of the environmental factor people used to say, if you are genetically predisposed and you have early rotavirus infection, you can have celiac disease. So probably rotavirus vaccine. And third, about this immunology part, is some of the celiac, they don't mount adequate immune response against hepatitis B. So when you diagnose celiac, you check their antibody status. If they're inadequate, give a booster.
Yeah, I think this is very important because this is what we do day in and day out actually. Prescribing all these things, and we tend to forget actually, and we tend to also forget about the celiac crisis also, which can happen at times, and another question is, any new therapy which is coming up, any latest therapy, because they're talking of some nanotherapies and all that, and some very good digestive enzymes being implanted along with the diet you take.
There are many areas the people are working to have a cure for celiac disease without having gluten. The one thing which came up 2-3 years back, that is actually some kind of enzyme which can degrade this the gluten peptide, which is antigenic. But basically it is they prepare in probably in some vector and didn't work. Then we have vaccine. Vaccine trial is going on as a immunotherapy to develop some state tolerance to the gluten. That is also is not in a probably first phase or second phase. Then there is a drug called larazotide. This is basically zonulin blocking drug. So they have the leaky gut. So if you give this drug, so this permeability will improve. So they will start tolerating gluten. This is not a cure, but probably for those patients who wants to eat, despite having celiac, you start taking larazotide, probably you will start tolerating gluten better. So these are the 2-3 things are in the focus. Many other areas, blocking the tissue transglutaminase and various interleukins are on, but nothing concrete has come out yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
So can I ask the last question in case if you don't have any more, sir?
Yes.
So I just missed out perhaps that, at what age you will recommend the sibling of a celiac to be
15
screened,
months.
and if it is negative, do we repeat screening at a periodic interval?
Yes. You start screening probably, if I am correct, around 15 months, because early screening does not help. Antibody takes time. You should not do it at 6 months. And then you repeat yearly. Because if it is a first degree relative positive, or this baby is HLA DQ2 DQ8 positive, so then you do yearly.
Yearly till
usually they develop, they like that in type 1 diabetes, they said at the time of diagnosis, then yearly for 4 years, then you do 2 yearly. So probably frequency will come down, after first 2 or 3.
Okay.
But don't do antibody very early.
Okay. So I think
15
I'll
months is
request
the
Dr.
right time.
Yeah. So I think for want of time now, I'll request Dr. Jagdish Singh ji to quickly conclude, and then I'll request Dr. Natwar to propose vote of thanks.
Actually, you're not taking any questions from the chat.
So there is one. I thought because we are already past 10.
Anything significant? There are 10 questions.
Yeah, please take.
Chat messages, but anything significant so that we can.
Yeah, so Dr. M.S. Vishwanathan has asked a child who has typical symptoms, very high TTG, histology suggestive, but anti-endomysial antibody is negative. So this patient happens to have all the tests. So whether we should label them as celiac and
this is actually celiac. If you have a TTG positive and biopsy suggestive, then you don't need anti-endomysial antibody. Like this, the 2021 guideline I said, if you have a TTG positive, you have 2 arms. Either you go to the biopsy arm or you go for non-biopsy arm. In non-biopsy arm, you have EMA. Problem of EMA is that it is a technically demanding test. It is done by indirect immunofluorescence technique. So there are many false positive, false negative. Basically, technician has to be perfect to interpret the endomysial antibody. Lalit, you have seen this EMA used to do it during your time.
Right,
So my answer will be that patient is celiac by conventional criteria and by 2021 criteria. TTG positive, biopsy suggestive is celiac.
Okay. So Dr. Mahesh Sharma from Bikaner, Rajasthan has asked whether there is any role of probiotic in celiac.
The probiotic is everywhere. Probiotic is used for, you tell me one disease where people have not tried probiotic. So far there is no concrete evidence to say that probiotic helps in developing tolerance or probiotic helps in decreasing the need for gluten-free diet. No, answer is no.
So another question Dr. Benjamin has asked about the medications. So like vitamin supplementation and so are they, what extent they may have traces of gluten? If the mother is taking medication, whether the baby,
No, the mother-baby relation, this is not, it doesn't come through the breast milk, but yes, what we talk about non-compliance, there are many sources of gluten, medication, cosmetics, and food additives we have not discussed in detail. So they are definitely the source. So in children, what we have to try to avoid those the capsules, because this gelatin part or whatever the sticky part, that is gluten. So instead you should give the tablet which does not contain this the gluten.
Right. So Dr. Vishnu has asked whether the incidence of other food allergy in patient of celiac or eosinophilic enteritis in celiac is more.
Yes, eosinophilic is more. Definitely. Actually, in celiac itself, you get more eosinophil in the esophagus, and this is one of the differential diagnoses. But this is not that the celiac is responsible for eosinophilic esophagitis. So when you get the eosinophilia not fulfilling the criteria of eosinophilic esophagitis, one of the differential diagnoses is celiac disease. Other is Crohn's disease.
So Dr. Bowdekar has put his comment that for to ensure compliance, giving wrong information is not right thing, as we were discussing.
No, actually,
I said that.
Is, what actually exactly I would agree with Dr. Bhavdekar, but that phobia we're trying to create is based on scientific fact. It is not based on hearsay and all that, because what we would all agree that once we are saying that we have got to remain gluten free, we all know that yes, it is going to cause a lot of complications in the long run. So just by pricing them, but being too much optimistic and telling them no, but we have got to tell them that take this advice seriously. You have got to follow our advice seriously. That is where actually I was wanting to stress that otherwise they take it very casually, because then they come back and they said, no, you never said actually, it has got to continue for a long time. It's got to be lifelong. So it is based on science. What we have spoken that yes, gluten free means you have got to remain gluten free. We keep on talking of कि नहीं हिंग भी नहीं देनी है, अगर पाइका की भी history लो, And if there is a pica, because that small children playing with all those clay toys and models, and if they're having a history of pica, they will eat that. That is full gluten. DOH is full gluten, and they would eat it. They would say he eats nothing at home, but when he's going to school or he's doing something, he will be eating all that because
Right.
Hey, Dr. Jagdish,
Yes.
I will just put one thing. What I guess Ashish Babdekar has said, this is in context of increasing the risk of autoimmune diseases.
Right.
That has not found to be true. But if you give
No,
the
we are not
gluten-free
talking about
diet,
that.
the risk
Mm.
of your
No. That was
thyroiditis,
not mentioned. That
that
was
is
not
not
the
correct.
cause of creating a phobia that other diseases will develop.
Right.
No. It
Okay,
was
no,
with
yeah.
respect to a gluten being given to a child who is now approved case of celiac disease, that he could develop more problems if he continues.
Now see my
Relating-
way of putting the fear is malignancy. There is a risk or increased risk of intestinal lymphoma and other
that was
cancer. This
even a
is
greater
2.5
phobia.
times
We are
more
trying
than
to
general
attack.
population. So what I do, that your child is going to develop cancer, and the intestinal cancer they develop is incurable. Now you decide, what do you want? You want to give poison to your child to kill him, or you want to be a normal child?
So that is
That
what
is
actually, Dr. Ashish Bhavdekar's objection, that we are trying to create a phobia of telling him cancer hoga.
the
And
cancer to hota hai. That he's
yes,
probably
we
telling in
all know
light of the
refractory
autoimmune
celiac
disease.
disease type 2 is very prone to develop lymphomas. But then again, actually, yes, we have got to be very sincere in our approach, and our scientific advice. What you are saying is exact science. What we are going to tell them is exact science. We are not trying to say that
So,
other autoimmune disorders. No.
so if I get correctly, the autoimmune disease incidence is not going to be altered, but the
No.
lymphoma is going to be definitely less if there is a compliance. Is Dr.
Yes.
Poddar?
And other
Yeah.
Yes, there are studies to say that incidence of lymphoma in those who are compliant versus non-compliant, difference is definitely significantly different.
Okay, I think so.
Those
This
who are
is certainly,
non-compliant.
definitely, this is the trump card we can use to ensure
Yes, this
compliance.
is scientifically based. We have
Yes, this is
objective
on
and
based
also
on
of internal
science.
medicine
Yes.
study. This is
Right.
it's a high quality evidence.
Yeah,
Yes, true, Dr. Ujjwal.
yeah. So, Dr. Jagdish Singh, any more comments or questions? So I would like to just update the audience in case if they are more interested in celiac disease. European Society of Pediatric Gastroenterology is going to conduct a free webinar on 13th of this month, and it is you have to visit the website of the ISPAGAN, and it is by name of Young ISPAGAN webinar. They are planning it monthly, and incidentally this month it is on the diagnosis of celiac disease. So we might get some more insight on the diagnosis. Yeah. So
And one last comment, actually, just before we now, we repeatedly mentioned, that wheat, barley, and rye. Rye, I think it's better if you put it the European rye.
Yep.
Instead of
Yes.
Indian rye, always were confused, and they would say, "No, how you dare say you can take rye?" Rye is always mentioned actually as an exclusion. So rye is a staple diet in Europe actually, and I have been doing all sorts of distributing rye, the Indian rye to people, that parent teacher meeting, that rye is something different in India. It's just
Right.
a smaller version of mustard.
Yes.
So it's a European rye actually, because when they read that rye, so they get terrified actually. Ki rye aap keh rahe ho dena, that means you don't have a proper knowledge of the.
Dr. Jagdish, I want to give you the answer in the public forum which you asked me yesterday.
Yes.
Alcohol.
Yes.
Which
Actually, this
type
is the
of
question
alcohol
young
a
adults.
celiac disease patient can have? See
Yes.
that what people say, that you should say no to beer, no sorts of beer, stout or ale. These are absolutely no. They are from these grains. Now whiskey is prepared from the grain, but the process of making whiskey, you are basically distilling the alcohol part, not the protein. However, American Food and Drug Agency, they don't put a label whiskey as a gluten-free, because post-processing and adding something that make it more susceptible for contamination.
Yes.
The whiskey is also out. So what is in? You prepare the wine from grapes, that is in, and you prepare the rum from molasses, that is in.
Yes.
Okay.
So that will make many young adults happy.
So it is like a conventional CME where we end up the CME
with some
Grape
fruit,
wine.
drink. I
Wine.
think
That is due, Lalit. Due on you.
So now I can go ahead actually and have some good wine now.
And what about me?
Oh, we'll send it across. One person will meet you, at the Sanjay Gandhi Institute.
okay.
Thank you.
It's a very high quality, gluten free. And if you're interested in port wine, I'll send it across to you from Goa.
Yeah, that will be very nice of you.
I think Dr. Natwar, now can you propose vote of thanks?
So, on behalf of Ped Gastro Rajasthan, I, Dr. Natwar Parwal, consultant pediatric gastroenterologist, Surya Hospital, Jaipur, would like to thank all of you. My sincere thanks to Dr. Ujjwal Poddar sir for sparing his valuable time and expertise. We all have benefited significantly today. I would also like to thank respected Dr. Jagdish Singh sir for excellent moderation and keeping the meeting lively, and supported by Dr. Lalit sir, who is a great academician and who is having always a helping nature. And I also thank to Dr. R.K. Gupta sir, who is president of Ped Gastro Rajasthan, and he is also having a friendly nature with all of us. And I also thank to all the participants who make this event successful. Though there are some issues, technical issues with network problem, but these are the technical issues. We cannot do too much about them. This is the COVID era. And I thank, not last but least, Cipla team and Mr. Manoj Tiwari for felicitating the technical support, and Krishna. And I just announced our second MTBC is planned on second Friday in February. I think 12th February is the second Friday. And it shall be on frequently asked question on childhood constipation. And we will contact you all soon with details. And once again, thanks all of you. Good night. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Ujjwal, Dr. Lalit, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you, everyone, and all the participants also.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Good night, RK sir.